What if I told you that everything you think you know about prehistoric living is a complete lie? What if I told you that the classic pop culture image of a caveman is actually the biggest, most successful real estate scam in the history of human civilization? Seriously, take a second and picture our ancient ancestors. If you are like 99% of people on this planet, you are probably imagining a heavily bearded, grumpy guy in a very itchy looking loincloth. He is squatting around a pitiful fire inside a dark, damp, and incredibly gloomy cave, maybe grunting at a rock. Right. It is the classic Flintstones imagery that has been drilled into our brains since kindergarten. Well, do me a favor, take that image, crumple it up, and throw it directly into the garbage. Think about it from the purely practical real estate perspective. Have you ever actually been inside a deep, natural cave? They are absolute nightmares. They are freezing cold year round. They are constantly dripping with mineral water, meaning the humidity is permanently stuck at wet sock levels. They have absolutely zero natural lighting. And most importantly, they are usually already occupied by things that desperately want to eat you, like 3-ton short-faced bears, saber-toothed cats, or massive packs of angry cave hyenas. Imagine trying to sign a lease for a new apartment, but the previous tenant is a giant prehistoric bear that completely refuses to move out. Who in their right mind would want to raise a family there? The undeniable truth is these caves were almost never their permanent year-round homes. In reality, these rocky overhangs and deep caverns were more like prehistoric Airbnbs. They were temporary emergency shelters that you only ducked into when a catastrophic blizzard was rolling across the tundra. Or, in some cases, they were sacred public art studios, the ancient equivalents of downtown galleries where early humans went to paint those magnificent, world-famous murals of bulls and horses before heading back out into the open world. So why are we all so obsessed with the caveman myth? Why do we define an entire era of human evolution by a place they barely lived in? It is a simple case of survivorship bias. We only think they lived exclusively in caves because, well, solid rock doesn't rot away after 20,000 years. Wood rots. Animal hides rot. Mammoth bones eventually decay. Caves survive. This leads us to a mind-blowing question: if they weren't permanently living in these dark, miserable caves, where were they actually living? Buckle up, because our ancestors were not just surviving. They were architectural geniuses. Long before the first brick was ever baked or the first 30-year mortgage was ever signed, early humans were building the world's very first luxury outdoor mansions. And they were doing it using the most hardcore heavy metal building materials you could possibly imagine, constantly battling the ultimate, most ruthless landlord of all time, Mother Nature herself. Do you think assembling a flat-pack IKEA wardrobe with confusing instructions is a nightmare? We have all been there. You are sitting on your living room floor staring at a cartoon drawing of a man with an Allen wrench surrounded by screws that all look exactly the same, slowly losing your mind. It is the ultimate test of modern human patience. Now, welcome to the Ice Age edition of DIY home building. Imagine trying to construct an entire house using 149 massive, freshly scavenged mammoth bones. You don't have a hex key, you don't have power tools, you don't have a YouTube tutorial, and you certainly don't have a customer service hotline to call when you realize you are missing a piece. Around 15,000 years ago, in places like Mezyryk in modern-day Ukraine, our ancestors did exactly that. They became the world's very first modular architects. But let's address the elephant, or rather the mammoth, in the room. Why build a house out of giant skeleton parts? Why not just chop down some nice romantic oak trees and build a cozy log cabin? The answer is brutally simple. Mother Nature gave them absolutely zero options. Our ancestors during this period were living in the deep freeze of the Pleistocene epoch. They were surviving in a relentless frozen tundra. Think of the harshest, most unforgiving winter in modern-day Siberia or northern Alaska, and then multiply it by 10. There were no forests. There were absolutely no trees. Just endless sweeping miles of frozen dirt, biting winds and ice stretching all the way to the horizon. Since they couldn't go to a local lumber yard, our ancestors became the ultimate pioneers of upcycling. They literally used the heavy metal leftovers from their dinner to construct their living rooms. And we are not talking about tossing a few twigs together. This was heavy engineering. To build one of these prehistoric mansions, they started by interlocking massive mammoth jawbones in a circle to create a solid, immovable foundation, almost like grotesque, heavy-duty Lego bricks. Next, they took the thickest, heaviest femurs, the thigh bones of a creature that weighed up to 6 tons, and drove them into the frozen earth to act as the main load-bearing pillars. Finally, for the roof, they took enormous, curved mammoth tusks, each one weighing over 100 pounds, and locked them together at the top to create a perfectly aerodynamic dome. If you have ever thrown your back out just trying to move a modern sofa up a flight of stairs, just take a moment to respect the sheer physical power it took to drag a 100-pound tusk across a frozen wasteland. These were not primitive, stupid structures. They were highly calculated aerodynamic fortresses designed to slice through hurricane-force blizzards. They were the very first real homes. Have you ever woken up shivering in the middle of the night just because there was a tiny invisible draft coming from the window of your modern, centrally heated apartment? It is incredibly annoying, right? You pull the comforter up to your chin, wrap yourself in blankets, and mentally curse your property management company for being cheap on the weather stripping. Now I want you to imagine waking up in the middle of a screaming ice age blizzard. But it is not a tiny draft making you cold. It is the terrifying fact that a massive, desperately hungry direwolf has just chewed a giant hole straight through your living room wall. Why? Because the walls and the roof of your majestic mammoth bone mansion were not made of sturdy drywall or concrete. They were completely draped in thick, heavy animal hides. Those furs and heavy skins were humanity's very first form of weatherproofing. But here is the massive, life-threatening catch. If you did not scrape, cure, and stretch that prehistoric leather perfectly, things went south extremely fast. First of all, the smell. If left improperly treated, your cozy prehistoric living room would quickly start smelling like a rotting carcass left out in the hot sun. Secondly, untreated animal hide is essentially just giant strips of beef jerky to the local wildlife. If you weren't careful, your home's exterior insulation would literally become a midnight snack for every sharp-toothed predator within a 50-mile radius. Clearly, living in a house made of leftover meat and bones had its serious drawbacks. So humanity had to drastically evolve its real estate game. Fast forward a few thousand years. The Ice Age is finally thawing out. The massive glaciers are retreating, and early humans are slowly transitioning from chasing mammoth herds across the frozen tundra to settling down. They started planting seeds, domesticating animals, and forming the very first agricultural communities in places like the ancient Middle East, an area historically known as the Fertile Crescent. With this massive shift in lifestyle came a revolutionary upgrade in building materials. We finally traded in the giant bones and smelly animal skins for something far more reliable: mud, clay, and stone. This was the glorious birth of early insulation. Our ancestors figured out that if you mix wet river mud with dry straw and let it bake under the scorching sun, you create a remarkably sturdy brick. When you stack these sun-baked bricks together and seal them with clay, you get something magical. Finally, humanity had walls that actually trapped the heat inside during the freezing desert nights and kept the scorching sun out during the day. You had a house that wouldn't blow away in a hurricane. You had a home that didn't smell like decomposing animals. And perhaps most importantly for your daily survival and peace of mind, you finally had a house that couldn't be actively eaten by your wild neighbors. The era of the rotting meat mansion was over, and the age of permanent, fortified architecture had officially begun. Have you ever complained about your loud, annoying neighbors? Or maybe you have found yourself deeply frustrated by the incredibly strict, almost tyrannical rules of your local homeowners association, HOA. You know, the people who threaten to fine you just because your front lawn grass is half an inch too tall or your mailbox is painted the wrong shade of beige. Well, if you think modern community living is intense, you need to check out the ancient settlement of Catal Hoyok. Located in modern-day Turkey, this massive 9,000-year-old community was basically the prehistoric equivalent of a tightly packed urban apartment complex. But it came with one absolutely crazy, mind-boggling architectural twist: the houses had no front doors. None. Zero. They also had no ground floor windows. Imagine coming home from a long, exhausting day of hunting and gathering. You don't just walk up to a porch, turn a key in a lock, and step inside. Instead, these mud brick houses were packed so incredibly tightly together that they shared walls. The streets and sidewalks of this bustling ancient city were actually the flat roofs of the buildings themselves. To get into your living room, you had to literally walk across your neighbor's roof, open a heavy wooden trapdoor, and climb down a steep ladder directly into your house. It sounds like an absolute logistical nightmare, right? Imagine trying to carry prehistoric groceries down a ladder, or having people constantly stomping around on your ceiling at all hours of the day. But why would they design a city like this? The answer is simple and brilliant. It was the ancient world's ultimate high-tech security system. Think about it. If a pack of hungry wolves wandered into the area, or if a hostile, heavily armed rival tribe decided to attack the settlement in the middle of the night, they couldn't just kick down the front doors. There were no doors to kick. All the residents had to do was pull their wooden ladders up close to the trapdoors, and boom, in an instant, the entire city transformed from a residential neighborhood into an impenetrable, solid mud brick fortress. Forget expensive modern smart home cameras, motion sensors, or electronic alarm systems. The absolute best way to keep unwanted guests out of your house is to simply remove the entrance entirely. From the freezing, wind-battered tents made of mammoth bone to these highly fortified mud brick apartments, our ancestors were actively writing the foundational blueprint for everything we take for granted today. Have you ever had one of those days where the world just feels overwhelmingly chaotic? Your boss is yelling at you, traffic on the freeway was a total nightmare, and your phone will not stop buzzing with stressful notifications. What is the very first thing you want to do? You want to go home, walk through your front door, lock it securely behind you, and just breathe. That profound sense of relief you feel when you hear that deadbolt click, that is not a modern invention. That is an ancient, deeply ingrained psychological instinct that has been hardwired into your DNA for over 15,000 years. Throughout this entire journey of human evolution, our ancestors were fighting a relentless, never-ending war against the ultimate, undefeated heavyweight champion of the world, Mother Nature. She threw freezing ice age blizzards at us. She threw starving, massive predators at us. She threw chaotic, unpredictable environments at us on a daily basis. And for a long time, we were just running and hiding in damp, miserable caves like prehistoric refugees. But eventually, human beings decided to fight back. We stopped running. Whether you are currently stressing out about paying a 30-year mortgage on a tiny suburban house with strict HOA rules, or your great-great ancestor was dragging a 100-pound mammoth skull across 3 feet of snow, the driving motivation has always been exactly the same. Building a home was never just about creating a physical shelter to keep the rain off our heads. It was a bold, defiant statement against the universe. It was early humanity's way of drawing a physical line in the frozen dirt and saying to the chaotic, dangerous world outside, "Out there you might be in charge. Out there the storms rage and the wolves howl. But right here inside these walls, I am in control. Right here my family is safe." So the next time you are complaining about assembling that complicated IKEA coffee table, or you are annoyed by a slightly drafty window, just take a second to look around your living room. You are sitting inside the final result of a 15,000-year-old survival project. You are living the prehistoric dream. And fortunately for you, you didn't even have to fight a cave bear to sign the lease.